Ever walked into a hardware store, picked up a SharkBite fitting and thought, this looks easy enough, only to get home, push it onto your pipe, turn the water back on, and watch it drip? You're not alone. SharkBite fittings are one of the best inventions in modern plumbing, but there's a right way and a wrong way to install them. In this video, I'm going to walk you through the complete process of installing SharkBite fittings from start to finish, covering everything from choosing the right fitting to testing your connection for leaks. Plus, stick around to the end where I'll share a pro tip about reusing SharkBite fittings safely that could save you from a costly mistake down the road. Let's get into it. SharkBite push-to-connect fittings are one of the most homeowner-friendly plumbing products on the market right now. No soldering, no special tools, no glue. They work on copper, PEX, and CPVC pipe, which means chances are good they'll work with whatever you've got in your house. And the best part? Once you learn how to install them the right way, you can tackle repairs and upgrades that would normally cost you a couple $100s in plumber fees. So let's start by understanding how these fittings actually work. Inside every SharkBite fitting, there are three main components doing the heavy lifting. First, you've got the O-ring. That's the rubber seal that creates a watertight connection between the pipe and the fitting. Second, there's a stainless steel grab ring, sometimes called the teeth. That ring grips onto the pipe and keeps it locked in place so it can't pull out under pressure. And third, there's a release collar on the outside. That's the piece you push in if you ever need to remove the fitting. Now here's the important thing to understand. The O-ring is what keeps water from leaking. If anything damages that O-ring, whether it's a burr on the pipe, dirt, or the pipe not being fully inserted, you're going to get a leak. So everything we're about to do in the next few steps is designed to protect that O-ring and make sure your connection is rock solid. Once you understand that, the rest of this process makes a lot more sense. Let's start with choosing the right fitting for your pipe type. SharkBite makes fittings in several common sizes. The ones you'll run into most often in residential plumbing are 1/2 inch, 3/4 inch, and 1 inch. Now, here's where people sometimes get tripped up. The size refers to the nominal pipe size, not the actual outside diameter. So a 1/2 inch copper pipe, a 1/2 inch PEX pipe, and a 1/2 inch CPVC pipe all use the same 1/2 inch SharkBite fitting. That's one of the beauties of these things. You can actually transition from one pipe type to another with a single fitting. So if you've got old copper supply lines and you want to connect new PX, one SharkBite fitting handles that transition without any adapters. Before you buy anything, just measure your existing pipe. If you're working with copper, the outside diameter of 1/2 inch copper is actually about 5/8 of an inch. 3/4 inch copper measures about 7/8 of an inch on the outside. Don't let that confuse you. Just buy the SharkBite fitting that matches the nominal size stamped on your pipe or marked on the packaging. If you're ever unsure, bring a short piece of your pipe to the hardware store and test fit it right there in the aisle. I've done that more times than I can count, and nobody's ever looked at me funny for it. Now let's talk about cutting your pipe. Whether you're working with copper, PEX, or CPVC, you need a clean square cut. This is really important because if your cut is angled or jagged, the pipe won't seat evenly inside the fitting. And that O-ring we talked about won't seal properly all the way around. For copper, I recommend using a tube cutter. You can pick one up for under $10 at any hardware store. Just clamp it onto the pipe, tighten the knob until the cutting wheel makes contact, and then rotate it around the pipe. Every couple of rotations, tighten the knob a little more. Nice and easy. Don't force it or crank it down too fast, because that can actually deform the pipe and make it slightly oval, which will cause problems with the fitting. For PEX, use a PEX cutter. They look like big scissors, and they give you a perfectly square cut every time. For CPVC, a ratchet-style plastic pipe cutter works great. One thing I'd avoid on any of these pipe types is using a hacksaw unless you absolutely have to. A hacksaw leaves a rough, uneven edge that creates a lot more work for you in the next step. But if a hacksaw is all you've got, just know you'll need to spend extra time cleaning up that cut. Once your pipe is cut, the next step is deburring, and this one is critical. When you cut a pipe, especially copper, the cutting process leaves a small raised edge on the inside, and sometimes the outside of the pipe. That little ridge is called a burr. Now, it might not look like much, but remember that O-ring inside the fitting? When you push the pipe in, that burr is going to drag right across the O-ring. If it catches, it can tear or nick the rubber, and that means a leak. I've seen this happen more times than I'd like to admit, especially on jobs where someone was in a hurry and skipped this step. It takes maybe 15 seconds to deburr a pipe, and it can save you from a whole lot of frustration. For copper, the easiest tool is a deburring reamer. Most tube cutters actually have a small fold-out reamer built right into them. Just flip it out, insert it into the end of the pipe, and give it a few twists. You'll feel the burr shave right off. If your tube cutter doesn't have one, a small round file, or even a flat file, works just fine. Just run it around the inside edge of the pipe until it feels smooth. For PEX, deburring usually isn't necessary, because PEX cutters make a clean cut, but give it a look anyway. If you see any little hanging pieces of plastic, trim them off with a utility knife. For CPVC, same idea. Check the cut-in, and if there's any roughness, smooth it out with a file or some fine sandpaper. The goal here is simple. You want that pipe end as smooth as glass before it goes anywhere near a SharkBite fitting. Run your finger around the inside and outside edge. If you feel anything catching, keep working it until it's clean. Now, here's the step that a lot of people skip, and it's probably the single biggest reason SharkBite fittings leak. You need to mark the insertion depth on your pipe. Every SharkBite fitting requires the pipe to be pushed into a specific depth in order for the O-ring to seal and the grab ring to lock on properly. If the pipe isn't pushed in far enough, it might feel like it's connected, but that O-ring isn't making full contact, and you're going to get a drip or a full-on leak when the water pressure hits it. SharkBite makes a handy little tool called a depth gauge. It's an inexpensive plastic tool that fits over the pipe and lets you mark the exact insertion depth for each pipe size. If you don't have the depth gauge tool, SharkBite also has a chart on their website that lists the insertion depth for every fitting size and pipe type. For 1/2 inch pipe, the insertion depth is about 1 inch. For 3/4 inch pipe, it's about 1 1/4 inches. For 1 inch pipe, it's about 1 3/4 inches. Take a permanent marker or a piece of tape and make a clear mark on the pipe at the correct depth. When you push the pipe into the fitting, that mark should disappear right up to the edge of the fitting. If you can still see the mark, the pipe isn't in far enough. This is your visual confirmation that you've got a proper connection. I mark every single pipe every single time. No exceptions. It takes 10 seconds. And it's the difference between a fitting that holds and one that leaks at 2 in the morning. Before you push anything together, let's make sure everything is clean. This sounds basic, but you'd be surprised how often a little bit of dirt, sawdust, or old flux residue on a copper pipe causes a leak. The inside of a SharkBite fitting is a precision environment. That O-ring needs to make clean contact with the pipe surface all the way around. If there's debris in between, you're going to have a problem. Take a clean rag and wipe down the last 2 to 3 inches of the pipe end. If you're working with old copper that has corrosion or green buildup, use some fine sandpaper or emery cloth to clean it up until you see bright, shiny copper. For PEX and CPVC, just make sure there's no dust, dirt, or sticker residue on the pipe end. And don't forget about the fitting itself. Before you install it, take a quick look inside. If you see any debris, just rinse it under clean water. SharkBite actually recommends this in their official instructions. It only takes a moment and is cheap insurance. By the way, if you're finding this helpful so far, hit that subscribe button so you don't miss future videos like this one. All right, let's keep going. Now comes the satisfying part. It's time to actually connect the fitting to the pipe. Hold the fitting in one hand and the pipe in the other. Make sure the pipe is lined up straight with the fitting. This is more important than people realize. If the pipe is coming in at an angle, or if the pipe is under tension pulling it to one side, the O-ring won't seat evenly and you'll get a leak on the side where there's no contact. I've seen guys on job sites actually kick a pipe to force it into a fitting that wasn't lined up. Just imagine what that does to the O-ring inside. You want the pipe going in straight and smooth. Now push the pipe into the fitting with firm, steady pressure. You'll feel a little bit of resistance as the pipe passes through the grab ring and then slides past the O-ring. Keep pushing until your insertion depth mark lines up flush with the edge of the fitting. Once it's there, give the pipe a gentle tug to make sure the grab ring has locked on. You shouldn't be able to pull the pipe back out. If the pipe slides out, that means it wasn't pushed in far enough. Just push it back in until the mark lines up and try that tug test again. One more thing here. If you're working in a tight space like under a sink or inside a wall cavity, it can be tough to get enough leverage to push the pipe in all the way. Here's what I do. I brace the fitting against something solid, like a stud or the back of the cabinet, and then push the pipe in with both hands. If that's not possible, SharkBite makes a special tool called a disconnect and depth gauge tool that also helps you push fittings on in tight spots. It's not expensive and it's worth having in your toolbox if you do much plumbing work around the house. For anyone with limited grip strength or arthritis in the hands, that tool is a game changer. It gives you the mechanical advantage you need without having to squeeze or push as hard. Once your fitting is connected, it's time to test it. And I want to be really clear here. Do not skip this step. I don't care how confident you are that the connection is solid. You always test. Here's how I do it. First, make sure anything downstream is closed off or capped so you're only pressurizing the connection you just made. Then slowly turn your water supply back on. And I mean slowly. Don't just crank it open. Turn it about a quarter of the way and let the pressure build gradually. Now, watch the fitting closely. Get your face down there if you have to. Look at the area where the pipe enters the fitting. Run your finger around it. What you're looking for is any sign of moisture at all. Even a tiny bead of water or a slight dampness means something isn't right. If you see a drip, don't panic. Turn the water back off, release the pressure, and check a few things. Did the pipe go into the full insertion depth? Is the pipe clean and free of burrs? Is the pipe round and in good condition? Is the pipe straight and not under tension? 9 times out of 10, a leaking SharkBite fitting comes down to one of those 4 things. Fix the issue, reconnect, and test again. If the connection is dry after a few minutes with full water pressure, you're in great shape. I usually like to leave it pressurized and come back and check it again after about 30 minutes just to be safe. Lay a dry paper towel underneath the fitting before you walk away. When you come back, if that paper towel is still bone dry, you know you've got a solid connection. Let's talk about some common problems you might run into and how to solve them. First, the fitting leaks immediately after turning the water on. This is almost always an insertion depth issue. The pipe wasn't pushed in far enough for the O-ring to seal. Turn the water off, remove the fitting using the release collar, verify your depth mark, and reinstall. Make sure you push it in until that mark disappears completely. Second, the fitting leaks slowly, just a small drip every few seconds. This usually means there's a burr or debris on the pipe that nicked the O-ring. Remove the fitting, inspect the O-ring inside. If it's torn or damaged, you'll need a new fitting. Then re-deburr the pipe, clean it thoroughly, and start fresh. Third, the pipe won't push into the fitting all the way. This can happen if there's a burr on the outside of the pipe that's catching on the grab ring, or if the pipe end is slightly oval from being cut with too much pressure on the tube cutter. Remove the pipe, deburr the outside edge, and if the pipe is oval, cut off that section and make a fresh cut. Fourth, the fitting works fine at first, but starts leaking days or weeks later. This is often caused by pipe tension. The pipe was pulling to one side, and over time the stress on the O-ring caused it to lose its seal. You'll need to reroute or support the pipe so it enters the fitting straight and without any side pressure. A pipe strap or hanger mounted a few inches away from the fitting can take the tension off and keep everything in line. Fifth, you're working with old copper, and the fitting just won't seal no matter what you do. Check the condition of the copper itself. Old copper can develop pitting, which are tiny holes or rough spots on the surface of the pipe. If the O-ring is trying to seal against pitted copper, it's not going to make full contact. The solution is to cut the pipe back a few inches until you find clean, smooth copper. Then try again with a fresh fitting. The good news is, if you follow the steps we've covered, cutting clean, deburring properly, marking your depth, cleaning everything, and making sure the pipe goes in straight, you should be able to avoid the vast majority of these issues. Now, for that bonus tip I promised you at the beginning, let's talk about reusing SharkBite fittings the right way. One of the great things about SharkBite fittings is that they are removable and technically reusable. You push in the release collar, pull out the pipe, and the fitting is ready to go again. But here's what a lot of people don't realize. Every time you insert and remove a pipe, that O-ring takes a little bit of wear. SharkBite fittings come pre-lubricated from the factory, and that lubrication helps the pipe slide in smoothly without dragging on the O-ring. For the first 5 or 6 uses, that factory lubrication holds up pretty well, but after that it starts to wear thin. Once that happens, the O-ring is more vulnerable to, tearing or getting nicked during insertion. So here's what I do. If I'm reusing a SharkBite fitting, I always apply a small amount of silicone-based lubricant to the O-ring before reinstalling. Just a thin coat around the O-ring is all it takes. This makes the pipe slide in smoothly and dramatically, reduces the risk of damaging the seal. Now here's the important part. Only use silicone-based lubricant. I've seen people reach for Vaseline or other petroleum-based products, and that's a mistake. Petroleum-based lubricants break down rubber over time. They'll actually degrade the O-ring and cause it to fail. So stick with silicone-based only. You can find it at any hardware store, usually in the plumbing aisle right next to the SharkBite fittings. A small tube will last you years. And honestly, if a fitting has been removed and reinstalled more than 6 or 7 times, I just replace it with a new one. They're not that expensive, and the peace of mind is worth every penny. So that's everything you need to know about installing SharkBite fittings the right way every single time. If you found this helpful, make sure to subscribe and hit the bell icon so you never miss a new video. And if you have any questions or tips of your own, drop them in the comments below. I'd love to hear from you. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you in the next one.